Hello and welcome to another episode of the Uncommon Energy Podcast. On this week's episode, we'll break down the results from the San Diego Regional Championships that took place this past weekend. We'll talk about what did well, what was popular at the event. We'll talk a little bit about a brand new tool card that was revealed, maybe teasing a little bit of some of the comeback mechanics that Pokemon promised to us at the World Championships late this past year. We'll of course have everyone's favorite segment, Guess That Flavor Text. And before I go any further, I do have to say I've been seeing some Guess That Flavor Text hate in the comments. Not about it, guys. Not about it. Come on. Everyone's favorite segment, Guess That Flavor Text. And then we'll close out the episode talking about the meta moving forward as Liverpool Regionals is just a couple of weekends away. My name is Chip Ritchie, and I'm joined here as always by my friend and co-host Azul GG, coming off of yet another top 16 finish at a regional championships. What's up, Azul? How we doing, man? How you feeling?
I feel a little bit tired. I did not have a great weekend in terms of sleep. Felt pretty bad overall throughout the whole weekend. Still was able to walk away with another top 16 finish. And once again, felt like I put myself in a pretty good spot to push for a top 8. Once again, was not able to pull it off, but only falling one step short of that with the top 16. So still feel pretty solid about the placement, or feel pretty good about the solid placement overall. Went with the Kyogre lost box for the 4th tournament in a row. I am completely burnt out on this format. And kind of, yeah, the overall experience of this tournament was not great. Like I said, pretty bad sleep, did not feel great throughout the tournament. I think definitely affected my play a little bit. I definitely did not play as good as I could, as well as I could have, for sure. So yeah, excited for like the next set to hopefully shake some stuff up, but who knows if it will or not. But yeah, a little bit burnt out on it all. But how was it to be back to casting in there's only been one event. You played at Arlington and now you're casting. How does it feel
Yeah,
to be back to casting, Chip? There's so many events that are all
I
blurring together, but
know.
I'm like, I'm pretty sure
I
the
know.
last one is the one you played in.
Yeah, I was joking with people this weekend as we're walking around going to restaurants. I'm like, I sometimes I just forget what city I'm in because we're like just all over the place all the time. But yeah, I was a caster in San Diego this past weekend. It was fun, and that was actually the first time I'd casted um in a while. So like I joked with Brooke, my wife, before I left. I was like, I feel like I haven't casted in forever because the last time I actually was a caster at a tournament was at LAIC, but that was just over a month ago. So it
Yeah.
wasn't like it's not even really been that long. But because in Toronto, I was there a part of the live stream crew, but I was not a caster. I was doing the analyst lounge area, kind of like hosting the show, so or something like that. But and then obviously got to play in Arlington. But yeah, it was good to get back into to doing that. Frosted Caribou was my co-caster. I really enjoy getting to cast with her. I think we've gotten a good chemistry together and really kind of bounce off of each other and play off each other's strengths pretty well, which is always good. Once the more you work with someone in the booth, you start to just kind of vibe together, and it definitely felt like we had a good back and forth throughout the entire weekend. Got to cast the final match, which is always fun, always pretty hype. We saw some exciting moments for sure as well. Games coming down to people like top decking the last card they needed, which is always really fun and really exciting. So I hope people enjoyed seeing that and enjoyed the broadcast and all of those things. Before we get into like our episode, though, I actually want to ask you a little bit about Lost Box Kyogre because yeah, like you said, you played it for like the 4th tournament in a row. Um, you said you're kind of burnt out on the format. Do you think you're more burnt out on this deck? Like, is that a part of it potentially? The fact that you guys have it doesn't happen that often that you stick to one deck for this many tournaments in a row.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe it isn't. Maybe I'm a little bit more burnt out. I mean, it's probably a combination of both. Yeah. Stuck with the Kyogre again. We couldn't come up with anything that we thought was that much better. We tried to make control work as much as we possibly could. But I think the big stopper for control right now is actually Lost Box Ray. And we expected it to be
Mm.
the most popular build of Lost Box, and it was by actually quite a bit, and we'll talk about that in just a second here. And it was actually more popular than I thought it would be, but it was definitely a deck we wanted to make sure we beat or had a fine matchup against. And the control decks really struggle against Lost Box, right? Because that deck can kind of do a lot of things. That's like the one that makes things really, really tough to deal with because it hits so hard. So we tried to make some control stuff work, didn't quite work out, and then we came up with the Dragonite V tech for the Kyogre deck to beat most
That
of the
was you,
bad
right? That
fringe
was your
matchups.
tech.
Yeah, I forget where I saw the card. I saw the card, So anyone who doesn't know what Dragonite V does, it has 230 HP. Its first attack is for 2 colorless energy. It does Shred for 50. And then the second attack is Water, Water, Lightning, 250 damage, and you put 20 on each of your benched Pokemon. And this is like a card that's been around and expanded for a little while,
It's like
but
one
I
of the
haven't looked at
best
it.
decks in Expanded, right? Because it's
Yeah,
played
like
alongside
ADP.
ADP. Yeah.
Yeah, ADP Dragonite is like a deck in expanded. I don't know if it still is. I mean, I don't know what expanded actually is right now,
Does anyone?
but
Stefan, I
yeah,
guess that's about it.
yeah. Go check check out Stefan's Twitter to figure out what the best expanded deck is right now. But yeah, I saw the card and I was like, well, it attacks for water, water, lightning. What would this be good against? And it like basically auto wins Arceus Duraludon because it has a 230 HP, which means Arceus Duraludon does not want to KO it unless they're playing a terrible list that has the choice belt, and even then they'd have to find it.
Karen's conviction, baby.
So it hits really hard with a choice belt. You're doing 280, so you can like one hit KO Arceuses. So against other Arceus matches besides Arceus Duraludon, it's really good. But it basically auto wins Arceus Duraludon. You auto win the Mewtwo V Union matchup because you just hit too hard, and then it just does 250 to 280 damage with the choice belt, which means you can one hit KO Lugias or Lugia Vs or Stoutland. Like it just can hit really hard. And then its first attack is Shred, which means you beat the lone Ice Q strategy, where they go down to lone Ice Q, and that's it on their board up against like the Articuno and Teleon deck, or like the Palkia Inteleon deck. Like they started adding Ice Cube so they could actually do that strategy
Yeah.
and go down to lone Ice Cube to beat Lost Box decks with the Wash Energy. And usually Lost Box can't beat that, but if you have Shred, you can beat that. So the deck just like fixed a ton of like fringe matchups and scenarios. And then in any of the even the more popular matchups, you can just hit really like I use it against Mew, I think more so than anything. I hit a ridiculous amount of Lugia, so I didn't use it that much. But the rest of the crew, were beating up on like Arc Duraludons and stuff, which is nice to see that the tech worked out the way we wanted it to. So yeah, it was a combination of couldn't make control work as well as we wanted to, and we found a cool new tech for the Kyogre deck. So we went with the Kyogre once again, threw the Dragonite in there, and I think it was still like a very solid play overall. Caleb got ninth. I got top 16, like I mentioned. Unfortunately, Caleb wasn't on the bubble or anything, but we are both pretty close to be able to push for a top 8.
Yeah.
So didn't work out this time, but still like a solid run overall. And I'm not disappointed with the deck choice for sure.
Yeah, there was one scenario where if like 2 matches had tied, that a 33 pointer actually would have made it into
Yeah.
top 8, which would have meant Caleb would have actually gotten in there. So really, really close to someone still getting into top cut with the deck. Didn't quite pan out. You mentioned a lot of decks there, but I think something else, like it wasn't a real consideration as like a card for the matchup, but just kind of ended up being good in, is that it turns out Dragonite's actually like pretty good against Regis as well, right?
Oh yeah. It's good against Regis as well because even though it's a V Pokemon, they 2-hit KO it, but you also get 2 KOs out of the Dragonite, which gives you a lot of time to like prepare for your next
Yeah.
KOs and set up to the late game Kyogre plays that you want to get to eventually. So like usually like your main Pokemon you're setting up for a 1-hit KO in the Reggie matchup sometimes. You want to do the Cram shenanigans, punch with Cram, you do some Sableye shenanigans. Like the ideal way the matchup plays out is you hit with Cram, they don't heal it, and then you go Sableye KO that Pokemon, set up a bunch of damage everywhere else for Crams and other Sableys to take advantage of for more prize cards. But then you're setting up like a fresh attacker every single turn, which is fine. And then the one attacker that you have that you can take a clean 1-hit KO with is the Snorlax, but then the Snorlax gets return KO'd immediately. So the Dragonite's really, really good because it lets you take 2 knockouts in a row without having to set up a fresh attacker. So if you're just like 1 knockout behind all the way up until you have 2 prize cards, then you just Kyogre to take your last 2 prize cards and you just win the game. The only thing you have to look out for, of course, is Regice can attack your Dragonite and stop it from attacking. So you have to make sure you have a switch card ready to go. But you have Guru. If you have Guru with a combination of a switch card, you can constantly keep a switch card on top of your deck so they can't even Marnie you out of it or anything like that. So yeah, it's actually super, super good in the Reggie matchup as well. So it's just like really good, just all around great card. So it's like, and that's one of the main reasons I think we really want to go with Kyogre over any of the other top decks. Is just like we found the cool new tech card to run in the deck. So, you kind of want to show it off while you can.
It feels like there's been small iterations on the deck ever since LAIC, where like LAIC to Toronto, like 6 or 7 cards got changed, and Toronto to Arlington, like 4 cards got changed, and now for this one, just 2 cards getting changed. Are you finally down to the perfect list? Is this it? If people are wanting to play this deck in Liverpool, I guess we'll talk about that maybe a little bit more later. But just for now, like definitely something you think you would recommend to people.
Yeah, if you want to play Lost Box, I mean, this or Ray, I still think Ray has its. There's definitely solid reasons to play the Ray build as well. Don't play Sablezard. Sablezard's not very good, I don't think.
Yeah,
I
think
its
everyone's
power
kinda
level is
hung
just
up
so
the
much lower.
Sablezard.
Yeah, not having Greninja, I think, is maybe the biggest thing. Greninja offers so much consistency in the early and mid game. It doesn't make up for the late game power of the Charizard, I don't think. So, yeah, it's either Ray or Kyogre. We saw something like Pablo's listed with the double Raikou, and then we even saw like a list that like Pram played Michael Pramont played at Arlington, where it had like the Raikou plus Zamazenta.
Hmm.
And actually thinking back at Pram's list, there wasn't that many attackers in the deck. It was like two Sableye, two Cram, one Zamazenta, one Raikou. So, but then we looked at like Pablo's list. I really liked Pablo's list. The four escape rope threw me off a little bit, so that's something I'd have to test to see if I like four escape rope. But the double Rayquaza, double Raikou, I really really liked in Pablo's list. So like that one's like solid as well. But yeah, I would say yeah. I mean, Lost Box I think is in a great spot. So if you're feeling uncomfortable by Lost Box, there's no reason to just kind of figure out between Ray and Kyogre which one you like more, and then run with it.
Well, let's get into those results from San Diego. We'll start off with just kind of how the tournament felt overall. The event was held at the San Diego Convention Center, which is a pretty famous convention center. That's where like San Diego Comic Con is every year, which is the biggest Comic Con. That's where just tons of massive events usually happen. And this was also the first regional championships with VGC added back into the mix this season. VGC, has the new game. Scarlet Violet came out in November, got a couple months, and now um, they had their largest tournament ever. I think around like 600 competitors, but I think because of that, we saw TCG numbers suffer a little bit. I think that if there was no cap at all, we would have definitely been over 1,000 players once again.
Yeah.
But as it stands, we were at right around 850 masters, making it the smallest regional so far this season, which is definitely a bit of a bummer.
Yeah, that does kind of stink, but it's nice to know that it's not because the players don't want to show up and the game's like dying all of a sudden in the middle of the
Yeah.
season. It's literally because the venue space that was acquired, they couldn't fit more people in, right? And we know like another, I guess like another thing to add to this is like we know that events won't have to stay like this forever because we know there's like 3,000 player Magic tournaments that happen in the US all the time. So the venues exist to hold like larger tournaments for Pokemon players, or even like the current venues and just getting more space. So hopefully, if not this year, because everything has probably already been booked ahead of time, right? Or maybe we could even look towards something like NAIC, which will probably be the biggest event of the year. Maybe we can hope that TPCI looks ahead to that and is like, well, the game doesn't seem to be growing quite a bit. Maybe we should acquire some more space and open up the cap from what we had previously thought we'd want, right? So we could see something like that for sure, right? That would be cool. But we know, like, hopefully going into next year, that they will like the organizers, hopefully the TOs take note of this, and like actually get some bigger venues, especially if we're gonna have VG alongside the TCG. You know, theoretically going forwards for like the rest of the regionals this year, obviously, but like going into next year, I guess, yeah, we'll have it for every regional next year because it won't be a new game next year, right?
Yeah, yeah, it should be the same. And I do want to correct one thing. This actually was not technically the smallest regionals this season, as Salt Lake had right around the same number. It was actually at 837. Just wanted to double
Okay.
check that. But I mean, I think that is partially due to like just West Coast things. It's a little bit smaller. More people live on the East Coast, right? And East Coast and Midwest, and like are willing to drive, but those people are not going to drive across the country, right, for a Pokemon
Yeah.
tournament. So just generally, West Coast events have been a bit smaller. But I do feel like San Diego is a pretty easy destination to get to. California is pretty massive as well, so I feel like we would have hit that 1,000 pretty easily if it hadn't been capped. And big props to the
Yeah.
organizer once again, because they were releasing spaces as they became available all the way up until like Tuesday before the tournament. So I'm glad they were trying to fill it as much as possible. I just wish that like more spots from the beginning were available, but I understand there's so many factors to it. But
Yeah,
um,
hopefully just moving forwards. Like I think we'd have to say moving forwards into next year. Like I said, besides maybe NAIC, maybe they can look ahead and be like, all right, let's get more space if we can.
yeah.
Yeah, going into next year, hopefully TOs, get more space at the halls that they plan on booking, or just like find some halls that can, or some venues that can support more players. Because I think we definitely have because even like Salt Lake City, I'm pretty sure Salt Lake City sold out, right? Even though it only had the 800 people, I'm pretty sure it sold out eventually. Like
Yeah.
there would have been more people there if there could have been.
Yeah, I don't know for certain, but I think that does sound just about right. But let's get into the
Yeah.
meta for this past weekend. And I don't think that there's really anything shocking here in the day one meta. We've got a little graph that was put up on the stream showing 33% of the day one field was Lugia VSTAR Archeops. And looking at day two as well, it was an even higher percentage. 34 out of the 89 players in day two were on Lugia Archeops, so even higher percentage than that. I don't know. I mean, it's kind of what we expect at this point, yeah?
Yeah, Lugia was very popular. Mew still pretty popular as well and did pretty well in the tournament overall. Yeah, I definitely expect Lugia to be around the 30% mark. I don't think it's going to change either. I mean, I expect that to carry forwards for. I don't think Crown Zenith is going to change the four. I think Lugia might be 30% up until rotation. And even then, we still have Lugia. We still have Archeops. It just loses a bunch of its special energy. We could still see it being a pretty powerful
Yeah,
deck
it loses the
post
special
rotation
energy
as
and all
well.
the amazing rare attackers rotate
Yeah.
too.
So hopefully not as good, but maybe still decent. If it falls to like a tier 2 deck, I think everyone would be fine with that though. So yeah, 33% of that. Lugia still sitting there at the second place. I thought it would probably
You
fall
mean
down to
Mew?
third
Mew sitting at
place
second
or
place?
Mew. My bad. Wait, is it? Am I missing a? Are we just missing a deck here? Did the deck just fall off out of nowhere? I feel like there was something else up here where it was like Lugia, Mew, and something.
It was
I'm missing Lugia and
Sablezard.
Mew. Was that the one that was like the third place
Yeah,
deck?
it was
Really? I feel like
Sablezard.
there was
Yep.
a different deck. All right.
No.
So yeah. Um.
Azul's
so
making up
yeah.
decks in his mind.
Well, in my head, I was like, I thought there was three decks that I always talked about being the top three, and
Yeah, Lugia, Mew, and Lost Box.
really, I thought there was a different one. Maybe I'm just like losing my mind.
What
Maybe.
deck is it?
I don't know. That's what I'm trying to figure out. But I guess I'm just like thinking it's something that's not Lost Box. But yeah,
I
you
was
still
thinking of
hanging
like
on.
Maxie's Evil Tower or something like that.
Yeah, I guess I don't know. And then yeah, Lost Box or Lost Ray at 9.5, Reggie at 7.8, and then we have other Lost Box decks, which would be like the Sablezards and the Kyogres or anything else at 5.2, and then Eternatus making it onto the graphic instead of falling into the the 30% other. It made it onto the graphic at 4.1%. So I'm really curious as to what the seventh deck is, to be honest. If Eternatus made it up to the top six. It didn't do very well, though. It didn't do very well. I hit one of them. Had a pretty reasonable time against it. Doesn't have a great Kyogre Lost Box matchup. And I don't think it's anything special against Lugia either, but it did make it all. I guess enough players thought it was good enough into Lugia, though, to bring it, though, as it made it up there at 4%.
That was actually one of the first things I noticed when I got to the venue on Saturday. I was walking around. It was during round number 2 when I was walking around looking at all of the matches. And one of the first things I noticed is like there is way too much Eternatus here, way more Eternatus than I would have anticipated. Now, granted, it was just at 1-0, right? Anything can win round 1 if you hit the right matchup in that first one, right? But
Yeah.
yeah, I was like, dang, that's a lot of E-turn. And sure enough, it ends up getting on the graph, the sixth most played deck. It did not have a good conversion rate. Only 2 people made day 2 with the deck. So that's not, I mean, 35 into just 2 making it, not a very good conversion rate. Probably not a deck that you want to choose to play for an event. And yeah, I think it just doesn't have a great Lugia matchup. Doesn't really have a great Lost Box matchup. It's probably okay against Mew, but I mean, honestly,
Yeah,
that's
your matchup's gotta
not
be decent.
I don't know. I mean, I don't think it's even the best necessarily.
Yeah, I'm not sure what you're being overly all with. I don't even know. Do you like? Yeah, that's like. Yeah, your Lugia matchup is the one where I feel like you're not that good against it. As long as people know the strategy against it, and that's why it's probably a little bit deceiving as far as the match goes. Like you pick up the Eternatus deck, you play on ladder with it a little bit. You're like, oh, this is pretty good. But that's because you're hitting a bunch of Lugia players who have, like they see the Weezing, the E-turn stuff. They don't know what they're doing. They don't know what like to how to strategize around it in the early turns to give themselves the best chance. And I'm sure if if you hit that same person again, it would probably be a little bit different. But that's probably their first game against the Weezing E-turn, right? So I think like
Yeah.
the matchup's a little bit skewed in those terms. And then like I said, yeah, I mean you saw I think you're probably your Sablezard and your Rayquaza matchup is probably okay as Eternatus Weezing, but against specifically Kyogre, I think it's pretty bad. And then Reggie, I don't know. It doesn't seem like it'd have that great of a Reggie matchup either. You can kind of sit Drago on your bench and build it up while you just kind of just draw pass
Yeah.
against the Weezing deck. Because Weezing, the thing is, the Weezing just doesn't KO anything very fast.
No.
You got the Sneasler, but even then, you're like 3-hit KO. It's like 3 turns of poison to KO any like Reggie or anything like that. Or it doesn't even like 1-hit KO a Comfey. Like the Comfey is still alive after taking 60. So you're not KOing anything very fast as the Weezing deck.
Yeah, I mean, you can beat anything by going turn 1 Judge Ascension into Weezing, right? Like that
Yeah.
can just steal you some games, and that's probably what happened for a lot of the players and that's probably one of the main draws of the deck, honestly, the fact that that is a possibility. And stealing games like
Cheesing.
that, yeah, cheesing some games is never a bad thing, for a deck to be able to do, that you want to choose to play to regionals. But yeah, I don't think it's a big surprise that it had a pretty reasonable fall off going from day 1 into day 2.
Yeah, I guess
But
like
other than that, I think that this is pretty much what we predicted. I mean, we said that we thought Rayquaza would be the most popular Lost Box version. I thought there was a chance that it would be more popular than Mew. It was close. There was 14 more Mew players than there were Rayquaza players, but Reggie was definitely on the rise as well.
Yeah, Reggie was not. More thing I'll say about the Weezing decks. I think I would probably just play straight Weezing. I think straight Weezing is like the better. Like if you're gonna play a Weezing deck, just play straight Weezing because it turns your Lugia matchup from from unfavorable to an auto win. Auto winning Lugia is pretty good. And then your Lost Box matchups in general, I think stay about the same. You do take a harder Mew matchup, but I think for auto winning Lugia, that's like worth the trade off. Like your Mew matchup is worse as straight Weezing, but then you auto win the Lugia matchup as opposed to being unfavorable. I think that's a pretty good trade off with how popular Lugia is right now. So if you're set on Weezing, I think you should try out straight Weezing over the Weezing E-turn for sure. But yeah, we're pretty close in our predictions of the meta for sure, right? Like I think we're
Yeah.
pretty close.
And now let's take a look at the top 8. So the top 8 was actually pretty interesting because there were 7 different decks in top 8. So 8 different players, 7 different archetypes. The one archetype that was doubled up was not Lugia. It was the amazing Rayquaza. We'll just run down it real quick. It was Gibby Archer-Tang winning with the Vikavolt deck. And it is pronounced Vikavolt, I learned this weekend. So I'm going to try to work on saying it correctly. Vikavolt and Drapion, not Drapion, Drapion. I'm going to struggle with that one for sure. Nathan Ginsburg getting second place with the Mew Genesect, so still having a strong showing. I don't think anyone is really ever surprised to see Mew make a deep run. It's not something you like are ever going to be, it's just such a high power level deck. Someone can just hit the right matchups and draw really well
Yep.
and get there and play well enough. And yeah, Nathan was able to do that. Grant Shin getting third with the Arc Duraludon, Azul's favorite deck. Ryan Harris and Pablo Meza getting top 4 and top 8, respectively, with the Lost Box Rayquaza. Makani Tran with a super unique Arceus Toolbox counter deck. Really was a big fan of this one. Darren O'Meara getting top 8 with the Reggies, a list that they said that they took from Azul. The list that Azul won an online event with last week. And Alex McNeil getting top 8 with the Lugia.
Yeah. So nothing. Like none of the decks that are in the top 8 I think are too surprising. Like I hate on Arceus Duraludon all the time, but it being there isn't a surprise. Mew being second place isn't a surprise. There's only one Lugia in top 8, but the rest of the decks that are there to kind of replace other Lugias. I guess Makani had the really interesting Arceus deck. We saw builds like this kind of pop up initially from Michael Catron doing decently at it with at Toronto regionals.
Yes.
And this build is switched up. This is a little bit different of a build than what Catron was running with like the Shadow Rider and the Fans of Waves to kind of lock out Mew. Instead, this build has a Drapion and it has a Flying Pikachu in it as well, alongside the Empoleon, the Espeon VMAX, of course, and then the 1/1 Aerodactyl, which is like your main win condition against Mew or against Lugia, is you have the 1/1 Aerodactyl, but now you also have a Flying Pikachu as well. So if they don't have the Dunsparce and you don't get off the Aerodactyl, you can actually still play the game against them, I feel like, a little bit.
Yeah, you've got some play. I mean, an Arceus just does still deal solid damage. Yeah, this was one of my favorite ones from the weekend, for sure. Definitely enjoyed seeing Makani's game. We actually had Makani on the stream the very first round that we streamed, round 3. It was Makani up against Israel Sosa. And Makani's had a great season so far. Got top 4 at Baltimore, the first regionals of the year, and has had several day 2 finishes since then. So, I actually saw on Twitter Makani was saying that thinking back on the tournament, he was kind of bummed out because it was like he felt like this was his tournament to win because his deck had pretty good matchups into all of the decks in top 8. Just, sometimes I think you're favored against the Lost Box decks, or like in theory you have a game plan against them. Sometimes it just doesn't always quite pan out. That's what happened in game 3. They went to game 3 in top 8 and Makani just couldn't quite close it out. Ryan was able to get the win in that one.
So Makani lost to Ryan with
Harris,
yeah. I mean that matchup is you don't have. I mean, you got the Flying Pikachu.
Yeah.
I think Ryan did play the Raikou V. It has so it had the Raikou V Scapegoat boss combo, so you can actually one hit KO the Flying Pikachu in one turn, which a lot of other Lost Box decks can't really deal with the Flying Pikachu as well. But when you got like the boss combo like that, you can kind of like eventually get there because you can always do like other stuff with the Lost Box. Like you can always be Sableline something off the bench or something if like the Espeon's not set up. And there's like a lot of 1/1s in this list here from like one Empoleon. The Empoleon's great in the matchup.
Yeah.
You play one Flying Pikachu, 1/1 Espeon. All these things are great in the matchup, but you only play ones of them. So sometimes it can be hard you prize some of them, can't set them up as efficiently, stuff like that, right? So can definitely make it a little bit closer. But yeah, overall, I guess like besides especially with there being less Lugia in the top 8, I think that did kind of make it a pretty good matchup spread for Makani. Maybe besides the Arctura matchup, I actually don't really know
Yeah,
how that matchup flows because you have a lot of special energy in the deck for Makani. Only like 7 basic energy, but that might be enough to get you there.
yeah, and Espeon, I think if you play it right, can probably clean up a knockout for you on a Duraludon. You can not knock out the first Arceus V and try to save
Yeah.
Espeon to knock out a Duraludon. Granted, your opponent can like retreat the energy off or hyper potion them off, something like that. So there's probably some levels to the matchup for sure. But outside of that, like probably on paper decent matchups across the board. Definitely, I think felt good against the Mew. Probably felt good against the Lugia. Felt good against the Regis for sure with the Flying Pikachu.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I guess Vikavolt is maybe the other question mark. Probably Arceus probably just traditionally does
Yeah.
pretty good into those decks, right? Just
Yeah,
like
Arceus
you could
yeah.
just attack with Arceus probably and be just fine.
Yeah, I think you just attack with Arceus is fine. Actually, I think the Reggie match was actually probably would be pretty close for Makani. So you do have the Espeon to stop the Regis from being
hmm
able to affect your flying Pikachu, but there's 4 paths of the peak in
Yeah.
the Reggie deck. So if the Espeon's in play, you stick the path, you Regis, you hit the flying Pikachu, and then you just go Gust 1 KO the Pikachu with the Gigas. You can also like Gust KO the Pikachu with a Lecky before it even gets set up as well. So that one actually I think might even be just like Reggie favorite. But yeah, overall, I mean the deck is like I do think this is like a very cheesy deck. This kind of Arceus build is like super cheesy. And it doesn't mean it's a bad deck, and your win percentage I think overall into the meta is like decent. But you are definitely trying to cheese your opponents a decent amount of the time, especially when you're like your main win condition against Lugia is that Aerodactyl. So you're hoping to go first. When you have to hope to go first against Lugia, it generally feels like that's not a great matchup, especially when it's the most popular deck. It definitely makes the deck feel
Sure.
a little bit cheesy. But I think maybe one of the biggest surprises for me, actually, I think for the top 8 was Gibby winning with the Vikavolt because basically I don't think we have Gibby's list exactly. It's not here on Limitless. I don't know exactly what the list is. It's obviously taking after Kreckler's build that they just got second with at Arlington Regionals. And I believe Kreckler, someone I saw somewhere that Kreckler was quoted saying that the deck sucks and no one should play it. And then Gibby takes the deck and wins the tournament, the
Yeah.
following tournament, which I thought that was like a surprise to me that I didn't even know that what Gibby was playing. I saw Gibby up towards the top tables the whole of day 2. I had no idea what they were playing until they actually like were in the finals with Vikavolt.
Yeah, definitely a bit of a surprise. I mean, it was like a deck that was kind like people knew about it obviously because Alex got second with it, but it didn't feel like people were really talking about it that much. Like I don't even think we
Yeah,
talked about it that much. Like we certainly mentioned it at least, and we didn't feel like it was like amazing or anything like that. And that's probably how many testing groups felt about the deck. It was like, yeah, this is like a cool deck. It's probably fine, but I don't think there's going to be much of it. And there wasn't, to be fair, right? You know, I think Gibby was the only person in day 2 with this archetype. But it was good enough for for him to able to win the tournament, which is cool to see. So yeah, the good old item lock and Aerodactyl, and maybe it's a little bit of justice as well because speaking of like tournaments that it was someone's tournament to win, like Dallas was definitely Alex Kreckler's tournament to win, right? Like he
yeah, it
he
felt
had
like
the
it.
good counter deck. There was so much Lugia in day 2 of that tournament. This deck does great against Lugia, it feels like, and no discredit to Connor at all. I mean, Connor's a great player. Connor's a friend of mine. I'm happy that he won, but it definitely feels like Alex on paper should have won and just got a little unlucky there in game 3.
Yeah, definitely felt like Kreckler should have. I mean, definitely had like the favorable, especially with Connor not playing Dunsparce.
Right.
So even if Kreckler goes second in whatever game, even if you go second there as Kreckler, then you can just start swinging Vikavolt, and like if the item lock can kind of sometimes keep them out of the game itself, especially when you're doing as much damage as you are doing with the Vikavolt. So yeah, that one definitely felt like Kreckler's tournament to take. And it's funny that like after that, Kreckler's take on the deck itself was like it doesn't seem it's not great. You
hmm
shouldn't probably play it. And then yeah, Gibby takes it and wins the next tournament. And definitely a less favorable top 8 situation
Yeah.
because the top 8 that Kreckler was in had what like 5 Lugias, a Lost Box, and a Reggie. So the Reggie's like the only matchup you don't really want to hit. And Kreckler even hit the Reggie in the top 8 match up against Christian, is able to take it down, and then has to go through Lugias the rest of the way, not quite able to close it out. Whereas Gibby, there's 2 Arceus decks, which are both pretty bad matchups in the top 8. But besides that, the Lost Boxes, there's 2 Lost Boxes, the Lugia and the Mew. I think the Reggie matchup is probably about 50-50. After watching Christian play up against Kreckler,
hmm
I VOD reviewed the Arlington Regionals top 8. I definitely think Christian made some mistakes that could have made the games a little bit closer, but overall, I definitely think it is probably close to 50-50 for sure. I think it was definitely probably close to 50-50. Also, I guess like a big thing in that matchup for that's something that Christian didn't have is Christian only played 2 paths of the peak, so you weren't able to be as aggressive with the path. So like the 4 path, I think, puts a lot more pressure on the Vikavolt deck throughout the games. So that was like a big difference that they would have hit. So I think that one's a pretty close one. So yeah, this one was like definitely a worse top 8 to run the Vikavolt deck through. But yeah, Gibson able to take it all the way to the Mew in the finals, and the Mew matchup I think is pretty good for the deck. So once you got to the finals, there, as Gibby was, it was going to be in a pretty good spot.
So I don't think that the results like this, I don't think that these top 8 decks are going to change really anything in the meta. Maybe people consider Mew a little bit more heavily. I don't think that many players were really thinking Mew was going to do super well this weekend. Nathan Ginsburg was able to still do really well with it. But other than that, everything else in this top 8 was kind of a known quantity. Maybe some other people hop onto the Arceus counterbox train. But outside of that, I think it's still obvious that Lugia VSTAR is the best deck in the format. Lugia VSTAR
Yep.
is going to remain the most popular deck in this format for every tournament that happens in this format. And I guess the question would be, we see it be 33% of the day 1 meta, 38% of the day 2 meta, but only 1 in top 8. Why is it that, like, I mean, that's similar numbers to what we saw in Arlington, right? It's like 33-ish to 35, 40% in day 2. And if we look at the top 32 of Arlington, it's just absolutely littered with Lugias. There's so many Lugias in the top 32 and 5 in the top 8. Why is there only 1 in the top 8 of this event?
I think it's probably because we've had more time in the format, so people have been able to figure out more ways. They've been able to refine their Lugia matchup, find more ways to beat it with their decks, whatever deck you might be playing, whether that's a Lost Box, or even something like the Mew from Nathan. So you've had more time to test the matchup, understand it better, and when it is that much of the meta, that understanding that matchup is so much more important than any other matchup, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you've had a little bit more time for that. And then I think another big factor here was actually more of the top players in the game chose not to play Lugia. I think that specifically to talk to is Bradner and crew, which no disrespect to the rest of the people who play with Bradner, but that's just like this is like the name I throw out there. You're all great players, but Bradner is the one who's been consistently doing the best out of the crew. So calling
Hey,
him Bradner and
listen,
crew is
do we
just
need to call
the
it
way it goes.
Bakari and crew? Bakari's the one with the regional championship wins, right? Or Sam Chin, right? Sam's got 2 regional wins. Like,
Uh, yeah,
what
but this is
was
like
that
Sam's first. This
reaction?
is
What
like
was
this is like
that
Sam's.
reaction?
This is Sam's first day too.
I said
Justin was
Sam
struggling there
Chin, and
too.
I said Sam Chin, and you went,
He's
what
been
was?
he's been struggling recently. It's his first day two in a little while. Listen, I'm happy for Sam to get the day two. I talked to him at like every single event. I'm always like, man, you got to put the Lugia away. You got to pick up a different deck. You should not be playing Lugia. You don't play enough games in the current. You don't play enough games in the game right now. And he agrees with me. And then he picked up the Reggie and he was like, you were right. I should have never been playing Lugia. I should have been playing something else. So he even agrees with me on that. I'm happy to see him in day two and getting close to a top 8 as well. Like he was on the winning end.
Yeah, he
So
was. Yep.
all he had to do was put the Lugia down. I told him the same thing last season too. I was like, put the Palkia down, pick up the non most popular BDIF, and I guarantee you'll have more success. The first tournament he does it, winning into top 8. But yeah, Bradner and crew, like I said, no disrespect to the rest of the players on the crew. They all chose to play Reggie for the most part. John still played the Lugia deck. I played against John twice in this tournament, and we tied both times, so we didn't get to quite
That's
close any of them
cringe.
out. But yeah, I played against John twice in this one. We tied both times. But I mean, that's going to be an impact, right? When you have 6 of some of the best players in the game choosing to pick up a deck that's not Lugia, that'll have an impact, right? They're going to be there. Maybe they'll be in top 8 or pushing for top 8, but they'll also be beating Lugias with a deck that's not Lugia, right? So I think that's even just like that, even like those 6 players choosing not to, or 5 or 6 players, whatever, choosing not to play Lugia. I think that specifically can have a bigger impact than some people think or realize. So I think that is actually a decent part of it. But yeah, I think, and then but past that though, more players like I think when a deck is initially determined as the best deck in format, everyone's playing it. But then eventually people get bored of it. Everyone gets bored of playing the same thing over and over and over again. So people are just going to pick up different stuff, try different stuff. I think it's a little bit of that as well. Like we saw Lugia still being the same percentage. Um, but we probably saw people who are like more regular, a little bit better of players who go to more tournaments, put down the Lugia, pick up something else. And those are the players who are likely to do a little bit better than the average player, right? So as long as those players are picking up something else that's not Lugia, Lugia's going to do a little bit worse overall. But I could also see if you reran this tournament, Lugia could still just be like 6 of the top 8 as well, right?
Yeah, and I mean, there were several players like on the winning end, like we mentioned, or like if they don't tie in round 14, get a win in round 15, they're in top eight. There's so many like
Yeah.
if ands, this could have happened, that could have happened.
There wasn't much
And
Lugias on the winning end, but like Alex and Riley hit each other, which were two of the Lugias
mhm.
on one of the winning end matches. So if they just don't hit each other, then we have two Lugias in top cut potentially, and then another one piece. Like if they three of the top cut is if three of the top cut is Lugias, and that's like feels maybe a little bit more reasonable. But like, yeah, I don't think it makes like a huge. It's not like a huge like nothing really changed. I don't think. I think just like the way this tournament played out, which wasn't as much Lugia in top eight, but Lugia is still the BDIF, still going to be the most popular deck. I think we'll definitely see I don't know. My prediction for this tournament was that Lugia would be dropped down to 25%, and I was wrong. It's at 33, which I think might be the highest day one meta percentage yet. So I was wrong on that, not by a lot, but I think we'll see some more people, pick up stuff like maybe we'll see some more people revisit Mew. Still not a huge fan of Mew personally. I did like the techs that Nathan ran, like the Collapse Stadium. I think is very strong against Lost Box decks and
Mhm.
stuff like that. But you're always just a Drapion away from wishing you had never brought Mew to a tournament, right? So you're always just like one Drapion away. And we still saw like Riley rocking the Drapion and stuff like that. So you're just a Drapion away from wishing you didn't bring Mew. So, but I think we'll see more people revisit maybe Mew, but I think the Arceus deck maybe more so than anything is what we'll see more people look into because I think Lost Box percentages are always going to be growing up until the point where Lost Box isn't really a viable deck in the format. I think Lost Box's percentages will have been increasing every single tournament and will continue to increase every single tournament up until the point it's not viable anymore. But yeah, I could see the Arceus deck from Makani being the main deck that maybe we see a little bit more of moving forwards.
Yeah, and speaking of other decks, there were other things that got featured on the stream at some point, not necessarily things that made it super far in the tournament, top 32 or top 8 or anything like that, but a couple of other interesting things to talk about. We saw in day 2 an Origin form Dialga VSTAR in on stream playing up against Caleb as well with his Lost Box Kyogre deck.
They were pretty
Um,
close then, right? To like potentially getting top eight. They were only like a win or two away.
Yeah, they were 9-2-1 whenever he and Caleb played. The guy's name's Derek Schwartz, and he actually came up to me in like round 2 of day 1. And he was like, "Oh, hey Chip, how's it going?" And I recognized him because he got on stream in like Milwaukee or something like that, one of the tournaments earlier this year, I think. Because he was playing Dialga back then as well. And he came up to me and was like, "Yeah, I haven't played in like 6 months, so I just brought my same deck." And that's like why he's playing Dialga and almost made top 8 with it, which is so sick. Love to hear that. So that was kind of interesting. I wonder if there's any merit to it. I don't know how it does against Lugia. It doesn't feel like it's probably great against Lost Box. I feel like it's probably pretty good against Reggie's because there's nothing Reggie can do to one hit KO it.
Yeah.
And at some point, you just take 2 turns in a row, right?
It
So
also
it,
plays Avery, so you take five Reggies out of play
yeah,
in
exactly.
in one turn or two turns. Yeah. So yeah, with the Averys, the Reggie matchup's got to be pretty bad.
Um,
Yeah, I don't think it's terrible. Yeah, like I think your Lost Box matchup probably isn't great. Was able to take down Caleb in a pretty close game two to get a tie. And then yeah, your Lugia matchup probably is pretty reliant on who goes first. But if you do go first as Dialga, I feel like you're probably in a fine spot. And even if you go second, the thing is if you go second and they just kind of like bench their Charizard, it makes it awkward for you to like go chase their Archeops or something and like loop their Archeops or something. So I'd imagine like yeah, you're trying to go. It might be yeah. It feels kind of like the Vikavolt deck or not the Vikavolt deck, like the Arceus Aerodactyl deck, where it's like, okay, if I go first, I'm feeling good. If I don't go first, I guess they just win. But if you can make if you can make the most popular best deck in the format a 50-50, I mean, it's not a terrible place to go from, right? It's not a terrible place to be.
yeah. Another deck that we saw a couple times from a couple of brothers, with the Sosa brothers, Israel Sosa and Sammy Sosa, both brought the Gudra, the Lost Box Gudra deck. This is actually a deck that Grant was testing before Arlington a little bit. He didn't end up thinking that it was the best, so I don't think a lot of thought got put into it from our group or anything like that. But yeah, I mean, I don't know if I imagine you haven't really had a chance to go back and see the stream or anything like that. But do you have any thoughts or opinions on Gudra, its spot in the meta, and the potential behind it?
It's interesting. It's been popping up a lot in online tournaments
Mm-hmm.
leading up to doing like really well, like winning online tournaments leading up to, and maybe Sosa won one of them. I don't even know to be honest. Um, but it was popping up a lot and actually doing like getting wins in online tournaments before this tournament. I took note of it. It was one of the decks I kind of was like, okay, if it's doing this well, I should probably like pick it up and try some games with it. Never had time to. I think the deck is solid. I just don't think you're. It's once again like it's like you're taking a tough time against Lugia. I feel like overall, like I feel like you're not. you don't have a great shot against Lugia in general. Like your Lugia matchup is just it's just close. If they go first and they just boss KO your first Guja, you're just kind of in a bad spot. Even if you get two down, now you go into one Guja, but they're still hitting you pretty hard from there, so it gets pretty rough. So I think it's just like that. That's the matchup. That's the toughest for the Guja deck. You're also betting on like no vacuums. You don't want to play up against a Lugia with double vacuum, which is like a lot of decks kind of take those gambles where it's like, I beat Lugia if they don't have these tech cards, right? So, and
Yeah.
Lugia can always have them. So you're hoping you hit the Lugias that don't have the tech cards that beat you, or the meta shifts around those tech cards being that good, and then everyone has them.
Yeah, it felt like a lot of the Lugias did not have double vacuum this weekend to
Yeah,
me at least. A lot of the Lugias had Raikou though. It
they
feels
did.
like
Yeah,
that Raikou was in like most of the Lugia decks.
yeah. I think it was, and the majority of the ones I played against had it. After like the second Lugia that I played against had it, I was like, all right, I'm gonna bench Manaphy aggressively now. Because before, like previous tournaments, like Arlington, I did not bench Manaphy first against Lugia decks ever. I made them show me their Raikou, and then I was like, all right, game two and game three. If they beat me with it, I'll bench the Manaphy now, right? But after the second Lugia I played against in San Diego, and then kind of looking around the tables a little bit, I was like, okay, maybe I should be putting down the Manaphy aggressively because you don't really want the Manaphy on your bench. It doesn't do anything if they just don't have the Raikou, so you don't want to put it down. But it's like if they do have it, you do kind of need it. So you do want to. It depends on depending on where the meta's at. It definitely seems like the meta has shifted to a bunch of Raikou enjoyers. So yeah, I'd bench your Manaphy's. Make sure you get your Manaphy and put it on your bench for sure.
Yeah, and then one more little shout out I definitely have to give to the round 4 streamed match we had on a super unique deck, absolutely the most unique deck possibly in the whole tournament. A Ditto Shedinja deck. The player's name was Caitlin Earnhardt. Unfortunately, she did play up against Control, which seems like it was a pretty abysmal matchup for her deck as she did not win. And but yeah, this was a really unique one. Shedinja from Vivid Voltage. I want to remember its attack name exactly. Yeah, it's Life Squeeze. Put damage counters on your opponent's active Pokemon until its remaining HP is 10. It's a basic Pokemon, 3 colorless, but it has the ability that says you cannot put it into play. You can't like bench it or anything like that. But it is a basic Pokemon, so if you discard it, you can use the Ditto from Pokemon Go with its sudden transformation ability in order to copy its attack. So you can still use the attack, put your opponent's active Pokemon down to 10 HP remaining. And then the way you clean it up is with the Garbodor from Rebel Clash with its Poisonous Puddle ability, which allows you to poison your opponent's active Pokemon. So it's a big combo deck. You chain it together with Raihans and Snorlax Gormandize to fill the hand up and stuff like that. She started 3-0 with it, and so it was kind of like a situation of, is this deck ever going to be 3-0 at a regionals again? We've got to get it on. It's super cool, super unique. And unfortunately, it was just up against a control matchup, right?
Yeah, I think even more so than that. Like now that I like fully have thought about that, like it's like and they went up against a control matchup, but literally I think all the control player had to do was bench SQ with wash energy and pass, right? And then the game's just over. Like
Yeah,
you don't
I
even have
mean,
to you
so
don't even have to attack, right?
well, she has Garbodor and has a darkness energy, so could attack with the Garbodor. It does
Oh.
80 damage and it also poisons. So you put on a little bit of pressure, but it's not a lot.
Yeah,
not
not
a
a
lot
lot.
of
Okay,
pressure.
okay. There is an out then. There is an
Yeah.
out. But yeah, not a good out at all. So yeah, rough matchup, unfortunately for that one. But yeah, I think that covers pretty much everything we want to talk about as far as San Diego goes. Moving on up next, just one card, new card revealed. It's not too much to look at here, but it actually is like a pretty interesting card. And I think the biggest talking point about this card is going to be kind of the discussion around comebacks that they kind of mentioned in that short little video that they showed us at Worlds about how they want to move forward with the Pokemon TCG in general, starting with Scarlet and Violet, right?
Hmm.
So it is competitive banned. This is coming out in EX Violet, I think. So for us, it'll be coming out in our Scarlet and Violet set, but it's EX Violet, I believe, for the Japanese set. If you have more prize cards remaining, it is a tool card. If you have more prize cards remaining than your opponent, attacks from the Pokemon this card is attached to deal 30 more damage to your opponent's active Pokemon. So as long as you're behind on the prize trade, or it has more prize cards remaining than you, your attacks to your opponent's active Pokemon do 30 more damage. So, like I said, they were talking a little bit about the potential for comebacks and how they want to make that a bigger point in the game. In that little video that they showed us at Worlds about releasing, EXs are coming back, Scarlet and Violet, yada yada. So this kind of feels like the start of that.
Yeah, this is really interesting. This card is really similar to a card that has existed in the past, Solid Rage from EX Unseen Forces, which is the exact same thing. If you have more prize cards left in your opponent, this attack does 20 more damage to your opponent's active Pokemon. So obviously, this one is scaled up for Pokemon having a lot more hit points than they did back in 2006, 2007.
But didn't it do like 10 damage at the base and then do 20 more? For some reason, I like remember
No,
that card.
no. There's
It only
another
did.
tool. There is another tool card that adds just 10 damage. It's Strength
Oh,
Training,
okay.
so it's just a
Oh, I
different
remember
tool
like
card.
a red, isn't like a red crystal?
Yeah, it's Solid
Is that?
Rage. Yep. Yeah, that's it.
Oh, but
I've
it
got it up on
doesn't
the
have a
screen right
base of
now.
10? Oh,
No, it
interesting.
does not do a
I
base of
remember
10.
yeah, I remember the card, but for some reason I remember it doing like 10, but
Mm-mm.
more if you're behind. Okay, maybe I'm
It's
just wrong then,
only
yeah.
20 when you're
Yeah.
behind. So it's like
Okay.
it's the same thing as competitive
Yeah.
band. Um, and I think that this card is very okay. Comeback mechanic cards like this, when we're talking about counter cards, cards that you want to specifically, that you can only utilize when you are behind on prizes, usually only work in specific decks. Decks that are
Yeah.
built to utilize them. Sometimes decks that have Pokemon that you can choose when you activate them. Things like Electrodes that usually blow up, give your opponent a prize. Boom! All of a sudden, you're going to be doing 30 more damage. I don't think like you would really see this ever being slotted into like a Lost Box or a Lugia deck as an option most of the time. It's going to have to be in a deck that can specifically go out of their way to utilize it. And so I'm
Yeah.
interested if like whenever they say like we've talked about that video at Worlds a few times in the last couple of months, right, where they said
Yeah.
they want to focus on comeback mechanics. Is this the type of comeback mechanic they mean, like a counter card, something like counter gain, counter energy versus something like in or Roxanne, something like that, or reset stamp? Because those are like, but you could consider both of those things to be comeback mechanics, but they're kind of in two different classes of ways you come back into the game, because one is useful, something you can play anytime, and one is something that you can only play when you are specifically losing.
Well, I think this card I think this card is comparable to Roxanne because it's a dead card up until a certain point. I guess this is less of a the thing about this though is like so Roxanne is like a dead card up to a certain point where like the tool card in competitive band, if you're always winning the game, even if you play the card, you don't care because you're gonna win the game anyways, right? So it's not like it was like it hurt your win percentage in that sense, but it's like a card that you can put in play more aggressively or utilize more aggressively throughout a game. Um, so I feel like it's a little bit more consistent of a comeback card than something like Roxanne, where it's like it it's not going to be as limited in its playability as something like Roxanne because it's there's not there's potentially multiple scenarios throughout any game you play where you could utilize it because you just have to be behind on prize cards. Your opponent doesn't have to have like two prize cards left or something. So there's multiple scenarios where you could potentially utilize it throughout a game, and it's also something where it's like not just like, oh, I see it now, but now I'm going to Marty. Now it's going back to the bottom of my deck. Well, I see the Roxanne before I can use it again. You can put competitive band in play. Be like, well, I'm going to hit with this. They're going to KO this. Then I'm going to want it here. And then if they ever go chase this Pokemon with the competitive band, I don't really care. So I'm just going to put it here, and now I'll have it for my next turn. Right. So I like it in that sense. Like I feel like it's a little bit more of like it's easier to utilize than something like a Roxanne. But yeah, I see what you mean with like there's a difference in like the hand disruption versus like utility. And I feel like the strongest utility comeback card of all time has to be Pow Hand Extension, right?
Yeah.
And Pow Hand Extension said when you were behind on prize cards, you could either move an energy from one of your opponent's Pokemon to another. And this was super powerful back in the day because of stuff like Scramble Energy and Double Rainbow Energy. That was the other one, right? Which could only be attached to evolution Pokemon. So your opponent would get ahead on their prize exchange, and then you'd move their energy off their attacking stage 2 Pokemon, put it on a basic Pokemon. The energy gets discarded. They lose the energy. Or the other thing you could do with it is could just gust something up. You have to choose between the two. And that's also a very powerful effect on an item card, right? We've all played with Pokemon Catcher, but not all of us. We've had Pokemon Catcher before, and that thing was ridiculous. So being able to use a gust for an item was pretty good. So like that is like the king of comeback cards that aren't hand disruption, right? So yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know which way they're going to really go. So far, it seems like maybe they're leaning a little bit more on the when behind, which does will create interesting scenarios where we could finally see because we haven't had like a meta in a while where you're like choosing not to take prize cards, right? I've had a couple scenarios playing Lost Box up against decks that play Roxanne. Like I had one this weekend where I played against a Lugia player that had Roxanne, and purposely in a game I chose not to draw prize cards until my board state was set up where could almost guarantee draw back to back 2-hit KOs or two prize KOs to close out the game. So It'd be cool if we enter that kind of, and it'd be really cool if they give us both, right? If they gave us N back and then they had stuff like Power Hand Extension in the format, and then we really have like everything, and there's like a ton of depth to when you want to take knockouts and what you want to knock out and stuff like that.
I think that this card would have been really good if it did what you thought Solid Rage did, right? If it
Yeah,
did 10 plus, if it was like plus 10 damage always, and then if you're behind, plus 30. And I don't think that would be
it'd be really
broken.
good.
I think that would be
Uh,
like, I don't think it would be broken. I think it would be good, though. I think it would definitely be good, something that most decks chose to play. But like to me, this is something that only specific decks will play.
Yeah, yeah, that's possible. But if they give us a ton of these kind of cards, right, then maybe that'll be like, okay, you got a little bit for
It does
each
just
deck. Each
depend what
deck,
else comes out for sure.
yeah, yeah. If this is the only card, if like we're gonna give you a bunch of comeback mechanics, and this is the only thing we see for 2 sets, then like, okay,
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying I
you know,
think that's what's going to happen, but
yeah, but that would be like the situation where it's like, okay, this all we got is competitive ban, like this is all you're gonna give us. So yeah, I think it depends on how much more they give us, and potentially how much other kind of comeback mechanics they give us as well. But it'd be cool if they gave us a bunch of like 4 or 5 different cards with like similar effects to the competitive ban, and maybe throw an N on top of that. I think you could get some really interesting in-depth gameplay at that point. But I don't know if they want to go that route where it goes too far down, back to like the I don't know, the days of like scramble energy plays and stuff like that with power hand extension, all those kind of shit. Because that was like some really like in-depth stuff of like when you want to take knockouts and how long do you wait before you start attacking and stuff like that. I feel like so. I don't know if we're ever going to go back to those kind of days, but it would be definitely interesting to get a little bit more depth in those kind of decisions.
I do think those formats have a bigger skill gap than a format like this one, though, right?
Yeah, I agree for sure. I agree. I almost feel like one of the biggest skill gaps in the Pokemon TCG currently is actually the mental fortitude of having to play 16 or 15 rounds to get into top 8, and then also just the familiarity with the long days outside of just like, yeah, so like the fatigue of just playing in long days over and over and over again. I feel like that's like one of the biggest strengths in the Pokemon TCG right now, or one of the biggest like skill gaps. Big one of the things that's a bigger part of the skill gap in the Pokemon TCG, and then also just like keeping up with the meta and constantly switching stuff up as aggressively as you can. You don't want to be like I kind of mentioned on last week. You don't want to be the person playing the tech card the week later, right?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, maybe that's why we've seen so many of the regionals so far this season be full of veteran competitors, right? We've had, it feels like every season there's like a couple of regionals where there's just 5 or 6 people who are names you don't really recognize. People who like have made maybe day 2 a couple times, but like people who are in their first top 8. We haven't had
Yeah.
that in a while. It's really been mostly, there will be a couple people here and there that it's their first time in Top Cut, but for the most part, like 6 plus of the players in top 8 are veterans of the game. It feels like.
Yeah, definitely like familiar names for sure. People you've seen, push into top 8s or close to it many times, or names you've heard before for sure. Yeah, and that's something I think you want to see. As long as you see that in the game, that's like a good thing. That means that the game is competitive enough that is that skill is still a pretty strong factor for sure. So hopefully it continues to be that way. That's like one of the things that I constantly put as kind of a even if I don't really love the format or I don't feel like it feels like too skillful, I feel like we're just like flipping a bunch of coins out here. If you can look at the results and you can be like, okay, well, we still have top players consistently doing well, especially when you see like the same top players doing really well. That's a good indication that it's not the format. It's something you're doing wrong, and then you have to try and figure out what that is so you can try and keep up.
All right, Azul, I think it is time for everyone's favorite segment of the podcast, Guess That Flavor Text, where each week either Azul or I will pick a card, read the flavor text off of the bottom corner, and have the other host try to guess what that Pokemon is. Try to guess that flavor text. And there are 3 potential lifelines you can utilize as well in order to help you narrow it down a little bit. Those 3 lifelines are what set the card is from, what stage the card is, and then also read an attack name. And this week it is Azul's turn to pick a card for me. You got something picked out, Azul?
I do.
I'm ready
And I think
for
this
it.
one
Okay, let's.
either one might be really tough, or I think you might just kind of know it off the bat.
I
So I'm a
might
little bit
just spike it
nervous.
right away.
Yeah. Are you ready?
Absolutely.
All right. Blank were created to protect people and Pokemon. They run on a mysterious energy.
Okay. Created to protect people and Pokemon. So the first Pokemon I think of, just when it comes to like were created by, so like Pokemon that were made by humans. It sounds like I know that like Magnemite is made from human stuff, but I don't know that it was made to protect or anything. I think I am gonna need a little bit of help. Not gonna be a just straight off the bat guess from me. Let me start with what set the card is from.
It's from Plasma Blast.
Plasma Blast. So that's the Virizion Genesect set. All right, let me hear the flavor text one more time. I'm having a hard time with this one.
Blank were created to protect people and Pokemon. They run on a mysterious energy.
Run on a mysterious energy. So that makes me think it's some sort of like psychic type Pokemon, but it was also created by and I don't think there's like a Magnemite or anything like that. I don't think I'm going that route. There might be like a Behemoth or an Elgyem in Plasma Blast that this could be. I'm going to use another lifeline here. Let's go with what stage the card is.
Is a stage 1.
All right. I'm leaning towards Behemoth. I think I do want to use that last lifeline though, just in case. Let's go with read the attack name.
Shadow Punch.
So it's a ghost type, not a psychic type, most likely. I guess it could
Is
be.
that a thing?
Could it
Is
be
that a thing?
Shadow Punch? Yeah,
I would
Shadow
never be able
Punch.
to. Yeah, I'd never be able to draw that logic to that
Yeah, bro,
conclusion.
you've never played the video games. Like, you don't understand.
All right, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh man, could it possibly be like Banette or something like that? Created by Pokemon. I don't think that's Banette. Stage 1 psychic type or ghost type created by to protect. Could it be like maybe Golurk? Is there a Golurk in Plasma Blast? Because that's a ghost type. That's like I guess it's something created to protect. It's got like protector attacks. There's a Golurk in my cube actually, and I think that the Golurk in my cube is from Plasma Blast. Now that I'm thinking about it, I'm gonna go with Golurk. Let's lock it in. Golurk.
Oh, it is
Let's
Golurk.
go. Golurk from the cube, brother. Let's get it.
I don't think it is the one from your cube though. Iron Fist of Justice, double colors for 60. If you have any Team Plasma Pokemon play,
Yeah, that's in
is
the
that one?
cube. That is in the cube.
Oh my gosh.
It's in
Yeah,
the
I thought you would maybe get this one. The
cube.
more I like it, the more I was kind of going. I was like, I don't know. Chip might actually end up getting this one. And you do get it. The
If you had
Golurk.
said Iron Fists of Justice, I would have guessed it immediately.
I know I couldn't do that. I knew I couldn't say that. I was like, even if you don't have the, yeah, I was like, that would just be like, that would make things too easy. I think for sure.
Golurk created to protect Pokemon and humans. I will say, like, if you are trying to stump me of Gen 5 Pokemon is generally going to be a pretty good guess because that's probably the generation I know the least about. But luckily for me, I don't think you know what a single Pokemon from any generation is. Like, you don't know like what generation any Pokemon is from.
No. Well, I know Behemoth's not from, Behemoth wasn't created back then. Behemoth's a newer Pokemon, right?
No,
Behemoth?
no, Behemoth's from Gen 5 for sure.
No.
Yes. Yeah, there's a Behemoth in Noble Victories, yeah.
Oh, okay. I'm just that shows how little I know because I was confident. I was like, "Oh, Chip's messing up here. He thinks Behemoth is all the way back then."
Yeah, no, Behemoth's from Plasma Storm, so I knew there was a Plasma Behemoth. But once you said Shadow Punch, I ruled out Behemoth because it's not a ghost type.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, it couldn't be Behemoth anymore once a Shadow Punch comes in.
Yeah, exactly. All right, let's go. Right. Chip gets a point on the board. Here we go. Extending my lead. I think that puts me up. That puts me up 2 points. I'm pretty sure.
This is really coming back to bite me that I didn't guess the SQ and there's another one too that I think I had off the rip and I just never.
I tried to hand you the Ice Cube. It is Ice Cube still.
Ice Cube.
I've held off.
You say Vikavolt again?
It's Vikavolt, and I've held off correcting you this entire episode.
I said Vikavolt. No, I said Vikavolt.
You said Vikavolt 20 times.
No, I said Vikavolt a couple times. I maybe I'm like 50-50. Definitely set out a
Someone
couple
check the
Vikavolt
tapes.
though.
Check the tapes. No way.
Yeah, no, the comments got me. Got my back on this one. They wouldn't lie. I said Vikavolt a couple times. The first time I said it for sure was Vikavolt. I was like trying to make sure I got it. Okay, but let's move on. Next thing we're going to talk about is just kind of where the meta goes from here. There's no tournament, no major tournament coming up this weekend. The last major tournament in this format will be in Liverpool. Not this coming up weekend, but the weekend after, the weekend of the 21st. Last tournament in this format, and I believe the Crown Zenith set drops on like the 19th on BTCG on BTCG Live. But yeah,
Yeah.
it won't be legal for Liverpool. The first tournament that'll be legal for will be Orlando. So yeah, one last major tournament in this format, but I don't think anyone thinks Crown Zenith is going to change up a whole ton. So this is pretty relevant, I think, past Liverpool as well. Still, I mean, where do we go from here? I think what you kind of mentioned previously was kind of like the cycle of Lugia, where it was like Toronto, everyone countered it, and then going into Arlington, it was the opposite. All the Lugia players adapted, had their tech cards, the canceling colognes, and whatever else, and then they dominated. And then we saw Lugia still be a pretty relevant deck, but it didn't dominate the top 8 like we
No.
saw at Arlington. But I don't think that was because like there was a bunch of counters all of a sudden, right? There wasn't like a bunch of Weezings and control decks in top 8. It was just a kind of a bunch of other meta decks, right?
Yeah. So that, I guess, becomes the question, like, does that mean we're going to go into the cycle of now Lugia is going to absolutely dominate Liverpool? This is going to be the first um no, that's not even true. Sorry. Yeah, Stuttgart was in this current format, right? Yeah. And in
Yeah.
Stuttgart though, that was one of the tournaments where Lugia got super hard countered, right? So maybe they're going to experience the first part of their cycle in Europe where their last regional championship, Lugia was super hard countered. So now at this one it's just going to thrive. I don't know. I mean, I think a big part of it's going to depend on what do the best players choose to bring. Are they
Yep.
going to be on the Lost Box decks and the Reggies? Which in America, it felt like this weekend that's what the best players chose to play was Reggies and Lost Box for the most part.
Mhm.
Granted, of course, there's still good players playing all sorts of different types of decks. There's good players playing Arceus Duraludon, good players playing um,
I don't
Lugia
know. I
and
think that
stuff like
might
that.
disqualify you from being a. Once you pick up the Arctura, I don't think we can consider you a good player anymore. You've gone
This
the
guy.
Arctura route. I don't know. We'll have to see. We'll have to see. We'll have to see about that. I don't know if I can agree with that one. Yeah, I mean, I think the most prevalent thing. There was two. I think the most biggest thing to talk about for Lugia is there was two Aerodactyl decks in top 8, right?
Sure.
And there is a really solid counter for Aerodactyl in the form of canceling Cologne, right? For Lugia decks to potentially run. So I think that's going to be the biggest question is just like, should Lugia decks to pick that up? Is that like a must include moving forward? Like, do we want to keep getting Aerodactyl cheesed? The Aerodactyl matchups are about 50-50 though. It's just kind of who goes first, right?
Yep.
And I would even say maybe I give Lugia a slight percentage edge, like 52%, because there's more cards in the Lugia deck to set up a turn 2 Lugia than there is in the Aerodactyl decks to set up a turn 2 Aerodactyl. I guess maybe besides the Vikavolt build, because the Vikavolt deck is just super aggressive, right? So you're going to see a lot of
Yeah,
cards really fast.
the
But like the
Vikavolt
Arceus
deck is
decks,
super
the
consistent
Vikavolt
for
decks,
sure.
yeah.
Yeah.
The Vikavolt decks, I don't know if I would call it super consistent. It just
I
sees a
think
lot
it's
of cards.
Yeah, it does
Some
just draw through the deck really, really
Yeah, you see a
powerfully.
ton
Yeah,
of cards, but sometimes you just see a lot of bad cards for the situation. But
sure.
the Arceus deck doesn't play as many cards or see as many cards to get out the turn 2 Aerodactyl. So I actually think Lugia has a slight edge against that. Once you get the Flying Pikachu plus the Espeon involved, though, maybe it does come back to around a 50-50. But yeah, I think that's the biggest question for me is just like, how much do you respect Aerodactyl moving forwards in this format? Like, is canceling Clone going to be the go-to tech now? Like, do you need it?
I mean, and
Plus
honestly,
two
there's
C's.
a bunch of other scenarios where canceling Cologne can come up. If you're playing Raikou in your Lugia deck, you can Boss plus Cologne and Manaphy. That's a two
Hmm.
card combo though, so it's a little harder to necessarily have that. Um, if you were to play against a Mewtwo V Union control, all of a sudden you can play Canceling Cologne and then you can Eviltal the Mewtwo V Union, right? So, and I'm sure there's other scenarios where it's probably useful as well that I'm not just thinking
Yeah,
of right off the top of
Wheezing.
my head. Yeah, yeah,
Arceus Duraludon. You have to do it twice against. Well, no, Arceus Duraludon. You can do it once. You can do a Lugia with 4 powerfuls, canceling Cologne, choice belt, 1 hit KO. Right.
yeah.
Actually, this sounds. The more I talk about it, the better canceling Colognes. I haven't thought about all the scenarios. I knew it
That's
was
a
definitely
lot.
pretty solid.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of like it because it covers a lot of the cheesy stuff. Like I think I would like it a lot more if Lugia was like a solid tier 1 deck slash tier 2 deck and it wasn't 30% of the meta, then I would be like, ooh, this is really cool to include these tech cards. But when it's 30% of the meta, you have to think about how these cards affect the mirror. And these cards, all the tech cards you can put in Lugia, all suck in the mirror. They're not good. None of the
Right.
cards that you can, except maybe Path. Path, you can do some cheesy stuff in the mirror, but that's like pretty, I don't know. They're not going to come up too often, right? So all the tech cards you could play, really cool against all the gimmicks you could run into, really bad in the mirror match. And the mirror match is the deck you're going to play against the most, right? So it's really hard to justify playing these canceling clones when the deck you're going to play against the most and might not even use the canceling clones against the cheesy stuff. It's going to be the mirror match, right? So I think that's the biggest thing, and that's why a lot of the Lugia players don't play a lot of the cheesy stuff because it's like, well, I'm probably not going to play against an Aerodactyl deck, but I am going to play against 4 Lugia decks. Why would I play a card that's bad in that matchup, right?
I do want to say just real quick because I'm recording on my OBS at home here. There was just a really weird sound that popped off that sounded like a Pokeball opening up, and that was my Twitch follow notification. I have not streamed on Twitch in like almost a year, and someone just randomly followed me on Twitch. So if you just heard that sound, if you just heard that sound randomly, that's what that was, and I apologize for that.
Gosh, professional content creator.
I guess, right? Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that we're not going to see if someone. I think like the people who do the best with Lugia in Liverpool, they're going to have something in their deck like that, right? We're not going to just see
Something
someone
spicy.
roll up with a vanilla Lugia. I mean, we probably will still see people with vanilla Lugia lists do well just because it's like powerful and good, right? But I think like the best players who choose to play Lugia, like, toward going to this event, he's going to probably have something in his deck to respond to these things.
Hopefully, something that's not Lugia. I would like to see of the more of the people who consider those top players, come up with something a little bit different, something a little bit new. I feel like we've been lacking that recently, but it's hard to do in these formats as well. It's hard to justify. I mean, for me, it's pretty easy to justify not playing Lugia. I don't get why it's so hard for everyone else to justify not playing Lugia, but it's hard to justify not playing one of the more top decks. When it's like if it's not if it's not Lugia or a deck that beats Lugia, it's hard to like really find something. But yeah, I'm hoping like the towards and stuff of Europe and stuff come up with something different, something new. Maybe there's nothing else really left, but even like little gimmicks like canceling Cologne or something else in a different kind of deck would be cool to see as well. Um, you know, some kind of weird tech card and even maybe an already established deck would just be cool to see. So yeah, hopefully less Lugia, but yeah, still probably majority of top players can be probably bringing the Lugia again. But yeah, hopefully they at least have something spicy. That'd be nice to see.
So, one other thing I did want to talk about is what your opinions are right now on the Reggie versus Lugia matchup. Because pretty much for as long as Lugia has been in the format, everyone has said, us included, that if Lugia plays Manaphy plus Dunsparce, they're just favored, right? I mean,
Yep.
Reggie's going to beat Lugia if they don't play both of those cards, but if Lugia plays both of those cards, they're going to be favored. But we saw a lot of Reggies this weekend. We saw a lot of good players playing Reggies, and not a lot of Lugia rising to the top of the event. Is that because the matchup is maybe closer than we gave it credit for initially?
I think it probably is a little bit more than I thought, especially after like winning that tournament last week with Reggie, an online tournament. I played it and I played against a decent amount of Lugia in it, if I remember correctly. And I was also just kind of playing it a little bit more leading up to that. It definitely felt maybe. I think I have to give Lugia the edge still if they have both, but they have to have both. And even then, it feels still pretty like Reggie still bricks sometimes, but Reggie sometimes cheeses you with pass. So I want to say it's pretty close to 50-50. But it's weird to say. If I say if it's close to a 50-50 with both, then that makes Reggie seem like it's really, really good, to be honest. Because then if you play against any Lugia that doesn't have both, you're beating them the majority of the time, right? So that kind of makes it. So I almost don't want to say it's not that because I feel like you're still losing as Reggie a decent amount of time to Lugias that only have like the Manaphy or the Dunsparce. I don't know. I would say it's close for sure. If they have both, Lugia probably still has the edge if they have both. I think the way it's going to come down to, but also it depends on other tech cards as well. Like they said, Path is a big deal in the Reggie deck. They play 4. They're going to have it out a lot of time. If you only have Pumpkaboo as an out to Path, you're going to have less of a good time because then you pretty much always have to put it in play as an answer to a path instead of like having the vacuum or something like that. So I think I still give Lugia the edge if it has both. But I think it's definitely closer than I thought. I kind of thought Lugia was kind of dumpstering it. But I think the biggest factor is just some of the best players chose to play Reggie, right? And I think that's always going to be the biggest factor for results and placements and what decks do well is what did the best players bring. So yeah, I think it's always going to be going to be a bigger factor than anything.
Yeah.
So that's why we saw Lugia do a little bit worse. Reggie was a little bit more popular and did a little bit better overall than it normally does. Even though there's only one Reggie in top 8, there was a ton of like Drew versus
Yeah.
Sam Chen, Reggie Mirror. That didn't complete, but the winner of that would have definitely been in top 8 because I think that would have been a 35 pointer.
Yes.
Instead they tied. Oh, maybe not. Maybe they ended with 32-32. So maybe it would have been another
I think it was
34 that could have
33
contended.
32.
Oh, okay. So if one of them won guaranteed, the other one won, then it would have been a possibility. I think they both had pretty good resistance though, so I think they would have got in. So there would have been another
That's not
Reggie in
true
top 8
actually
and so on.
because all 34s made it. So it was a 32-32. Yeah, it was a 32-32 matchup.
Okay, okay. Oh no, yeah, that's true. That's true. That's true. Yeah, it's a 32-32 matchup. And then Bradner came into day 2 at 8-1 with Reggie. Definitely had some probably unfortunate situations arise. Usually when someone comes in and we have a good player like that coming in at 8-1, they're usually going to be in the top 8 on the next day. Didn't end up happening. So like, I mean, yeah, Reggies were there. It's just like, I mean, there's a lot of good players, a lot of different decks. So definitely did better than we expected. But yeah, the Lugia matchup in general, yeah, I think it's definitely not as bad for Reggie as I thought when they have the Manny Dunny.
Yeah, probably a little closer than merely probably anyone gave it credit for. So,
Yeah, I think it seemed like the community in general was just like if they have Manny and Dunny, you lose. If they don't, you're favorable. But definitely seems like it's a little bit more back and forth in the in between there.
so moving forward in the format, do we expect Rayquaza to remain the most played Lost Box deck? It did just have 2 placements in the top 8. Obviously, you and Caleb were right there in the top 16 with the Kyogre. Um, but Rayquaza seems to have definitely been the more popular choice. And I guess maybe another question would just be like, why do you think more people have not picked up the Kyogre? Is it just like
Um,
that much more difficult to play maybe than Rayquaza?
it's definitely a lot more difficult to play. Like not even like because I play the deck, it just is it's the hardest Lost Box deck to play, I think, in general.
Yeah.
Rayquaza is a lot more straightforward. The only thing you have to do with Rayquaza constantly is making sure what energy you have in the deck, what energy you have in your hand. But like your game plans moving forward are so much more linear than with the Kyogre deck. There's so many more things you have to think about as the Kyogre deck, like turn to turn. But I do think the Rayquaza deck is pretty powerful. I don't think it's like better than Kyogre. I do think they're both better than Sablezard. That's like for sure. I think the power level of Sablezard is just too low. Even if there's maybe Sablezard's a little bit more consistent, I think the power level of Sablezard is so much lower. Maybe not though, because like I brought up the fact of the Greninja. But like usually the trade-off is you have a lot more switch cards in the Sablezard build. But you do need those more explosive starts where you get out like the triple comb feed to be able to abuse all those switch cards anyway. So you do have a little bit more to work for. So the Power Greninja is a pretty big deal. But yeah, I think Rayquaza will be the most popular moving forwards. I definitely think the Kyogre is the harder build to play, but it's not enough to the point where it's like you definitely should be playing Kyogre. Learn the Kyogre over the Rayquaza. I think Rayquaza is also super solid. They both have their ups and downs. Rayquaza has a little bit better of a matchup spread, I think, overall against the fringe stuff. You don't need a tech for any of it. You just kind of one hit KO everything with Rayquaza. You don't have to try and prepare for Duraludon or anything like that. But yeah, I'm still a fan of the Kyogre. If I play Lost Box again, I'll probably be Kyogre. I really don't want to play Lost Box again, though. Hopefully, Crown Zenith shakes up the format enough where I'm not playing Lugia or Lost Box, but still bringing a pretty good deck to the next tournament.
So, do you think that Mew getting second place is going to have an impact on its finishes potentially? I don't think its meta share is going to change. I think it's always going to probably be that second most played deck just because of how accessible it is, how powerful it is, and how much people like to play it.
Yeah.
But, I mean, in America at least, we didn't see very many top level players choosing to play it to the tournament this weekend, where in past tournaments they have. Do you think that maybe some of the top players who have played it in the past have put it down? Do you think like they'll see themselves going to pick it back up? Like, is the meta move to a spot where Mew isn't as hated in the format, like, or not hated, but like isn't as like pressured in the format as maybe it was for like Arlington previously?
I think there's definitely less pressure on it. I think Mew was just kind of caught in the crossfire of Mewtwo v Union for the most part for Arlington. Like that's kind of just unfortunate for Mew. I say that, but I don't really care for Mew as well, to be honest. I think it'll sit at the 12 to 15%. We saw it at just under that at 11 point something for this tournament for San Diego, but I think moving forward it'll be at that 12 to 15% for the next major event for probably Liverpool, and moving forwards probably like I said, Crown Zenith theoretically if it doesn't change up too much, which it doesn't seem like it will, it'll maintain that. More people might give it a shot. I don't think it really changes too much in terms of it. Definitely is less. There's just less Drapion. I think that's like the main thing, right? Is how much Drapion is there? But Lost Box going up in popularity, especially the Ray build. To be honest, that's pretty bad for Mew because like there's gimmicky stuff you can play and do up against the Kyogre build or even the Sablezard build. I feel like Roxanne hits Sablezard really hard. But the thing about the Kyogre build is Kyogre build can play around Roxanne, but the
Can't
Rayquaza
play around
build
Manaphy though. That's
well,
what
that's true.
Xander Burrow
Yeah.
played the Manaphy in his Mew deck. Is that the key, the secret, the tech?
I guess if you really want to beat the Kyogre build, but I feel like Ray's
I
the,
heard that Xander played against Cal Connor round one, and
yeah.
Xander Perot playing the Mew VMAX deck with Manaphy in it, and Cal was playing Lost Box Kyogre. And apparently, when Xander benched the Manaphy, Cal like lost his mind, like did not It was like his brain broke, is what I heard someone say. Like he could not
Could
compute, could not understand what was happening. Why is there a Manaphy on the field right now in this Mew deck?
not comprehend. I mean, that's fair. Like, what that would be like, I would see that. I'd be like, what is going on? Why is this here? For anyone who hasn't seen Xander's list either, Xander also played a 1/1 Aerodactyl in Mew to once again just kind of be like get that extra win percentage. And Mew doesn't need as much help against Lugia as some other decks do, like the Arceus deck or the Vikavolt deck. But it
Vikavolt.
is nice whenever you go first to kind of just auto win, right? And then when you go second, be like, all right, I'll get cheesy if I can win. That's great. If not, that's fine. Game 2, where I get off my turn 1 or turn 2 Aerodactyl, right? So it's like an interesting inclusion there from Xander. And yeah, also the Manaphy really did not want to lose the Kyogre, I guess, with that one. But yeah, I feel like Mew's not in a ridiculously good. I feel like it's still in a pretty mid spot. There's still Drapions out there. And then I think the biggest thing is like the Lost Ray deck, I think has a pretty solid matchup against them. Overall, I mean, I guess Roxanne Path can come in. You use Ray, you KO Mew, Roxanne Path happens, and maybe you're in trouble from there. I guess like that could still be a thing. So I don't know. But if like the Ray decks play like the Goon, I'm sure there's some cheesy stuff you can do with like Sableye Goon and set up damage on like Greninja Sableye Goon, like Greninja Sableye, and then set up some damage on Genesect, and then go like Goon Pink plus Rayquaza Swing and just kind of win the game in one turn or something like that. So yeah, I'm not a huge fan of Mew still. I think it's like fine. I think it's fine. I think having some cool tech cards in there is going to be a big deal. Like we said, it was Xander, Manaphy, and Aerodactyl, and then we saw Nathan with the collapsed stadium. I think was the big thing that gave them a lot of surprise factor up against probably quite a few matchups. So I think you bring something a little cheesy. I think in the Mew.
Yeah, and once again,
Don't play Melometal Mew. I would say don't play Melometal Mew. I think it's like too straightforward. You don't have enough room for anything.
once again, having the surprise factor, I think, is pretty important when it comes to playing a Pokemon tournament. Even if it's just one card, right?
Yep.
Have something that people aren't going to be expecting. Like if you're playing Lost Box Kyogre, having the Dragonite going into this weekend, not something people would have expected. Isaiah Bradner and all of them decided to play a Cape of Toughness in their Reggie deck. Drew Kennett
Drew
also
also had
played,
Reggie.
yeah, had the Cape of Toughness, and he also had Lost Vacuum. So he had the tech
Mirror,
for
mirror
the tech.
tech.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
The mirror tech. It wasn't. He actually got interviewed by Puka, and Puka asked him about that. He was like, it wasn't for that. It was for like the, I think like the parasols
Shadow
and stuff
Rider
like that,
combo.
most likely.
Yeah.
And
Also
it's
beats the
like it
Shadow
just,
Rider Collapse Stadium
yeah.
combo.
And it just happens that it also works for him to, do that in the mirror if other people came to that same
Extreme
conclusion.
cheese.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I think the last question we have written down here for the meta adapting moving forward is, which of the two Arceus decks do you think is best? I know what your answer is going to be for that. You definitely are going to think that Makani's is way better than Arcturaludon. But do you think we'll ever get to a spot where like a deck like that is going to be more popular than Arceus Duraludon?
That'd be tough. I think we could get there. I think one of the reasons people like Arcturaludon is like it's been a deck for a while. Ease of access play, but the thing is, like, it's almost like two different categories of players who show up to Pokemon tournaments. There's the ones who are trying to play for the win, play for top 8. There's ones who are just trying to show up and have fun with their deck. And that's like where a lot of the percentage I feel like comes for Arcturaludon. I know Grant Shen is a diehard Arceus Duraludon fan for sure. And I think there's probably a couple other, and Grant Shen's a great player, right? And there's a couple other of those higher end players who probably think the deck is at least solid, or really think it is, the deck right now. But yeah, I'm not a huge fan of it still, and I think its bigger percentage is coming from the play. It's been a deck for a while, which is one of the reasons Mew's percentage is always going to be so high, right? Even if everyone plays a Drapion, Mew's percentage will still be pretty high because a lot of people are just coming to show up with their Mew deck, right, and play a Pokemon tournament, right? So that's going to be a big percentage of why Arceus Duraludon is going to be probably going to still be that most popular Arceus deck. But I do think there is some. I do think the more powerful of the two is probably what Makani brought, or some kind of build like that.
Yeah.
If I had to bring an Arceus deck, it would definitely be something like that. I'd start with something like that for sure. Arctura ain't it.
I think that is going to do it for our episode this week. Thanks so much to everyone for listening and tuning in. As always, we really do appreciate the support. And if you want to go that little extra mile and support us even more, easiest way to do that is to leave a rating for the podcast on whatever podcasting platform you listen on. It just takes a second and it really does help more people discover the podcast, so it helps us out a whole bunch. If you're watching on YouTube, we'd appreciate any sort of sub or dropping a like on the video. Drop us a comment. Let us know how you're doing on the Guess That flavor text. And if you want to interact with us and stay up to date with what's happening, the best place to do that is over on Twitter. You can follow myself at Chip Ritchie. Azul is at Azul_GG. And you can follow the podcast at Uncommon_Energy.
That's going to do it. Catch y'all next week at 7 a.m. Eastern on Tuesdays. Peace.